what are you talking about? What is the self? Yeah, and it's our connection with the cosmic self. It all figures out to the same thing. It's the presence of God in us. Yeah. Good people have said, well, I lost myself, or I had to go away for a few months to find myself. What self are they looking for? It's not the intellect, and it's not the emotional life, or any of that kind of stuff. But it's a personal identity.
You have this chopping up the frozen sea inside us. Do you have that? No?
What's that?
Okay. I just got one wet. Do you have one of these, Susie?
What?
Chopping up.
I don't know. Yeah. Chopping up the frozen sea inside of us. Is this the same book?
No.
No? Something
We
different?
can send
From-
them one
yeah.
of these. We don't need to.
The historical Jesus is vanishing.
Make it short.
The spiritual Christ within awaits our discovery.
So,
New horizons for the journey, living waters.
as we begin, I'm going to start with our Jesus Christ is now here, infusing me and the world with his light and wisdom. Jesus Christ is now here, infusing me and the world with his light and wisdom. Together? Jesus Christ is now here, infusing me and the world with his light and wisdom. We give thanks for that light and that wisdom. That light that shines in us, for us, and through us. Amen. This one, the title is Chopping Up the Frozen Sea Inside Us. I came across this in one of the books of Tom Harpur's. So I wanted to just expose you to it. It begins with a quotation from Franz Kafka. I think we ought to read only the kind of books that wound and stab us. We need the books that affect us like a disaster, that grieve us deeply. A book must be the axe for the frozen sea inside us.
I don't believe.
That's
Thank
quite
you
a...
very much, Kafka.
Yeah.
Mackerel.
Kafka.
A little violent.
I have been known to read the last page of a book to make sure it comes out all right. But
That's right.
I don't.
It's
Yeah.
not going where I'm going. I don't read the rest.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, he continues with, this quotation describes with uncanny precision the kind of books I researched before writing The Pagan Christ. Naturally, such books inevitably shock, offend, and often acutely anger those most deeply invested in the status quo. Those with most to lose begin to feel the ground shaking under their feet as the ice-breaking message comes forth. But such books also carry with them the seeds of great hope for a future of expanded consciousness and personal progress for those prepared to grapple with new and radical ideas. Obviously, the Pagan Christ has struck a chord in the hearts of a large and growing number of people, with many writing moving letters telling of spiritual liberation. Obviously, too, it has provoked Christian proselytizers and conservatives of many stripes to attack and do all in their power to discredit or weaken the book's credibility. This, in the light of Kafka's words, was entirely predictable. Some of the tactics and language used by the book's detractors have been unfortunate in view of their author's claims to Orthodox Christian beliefs. But again, this is not surprising because so much is at stake for them. Significantly, the critics always try to undermine one's sources, even though none to date has shown any sign of having taken the effort to read them themselves. Many of the criticisms circle about footnotes and other peripheral issues while avoiding the central thrust of the book's message. While the question of whether Jesus was an historical person is not the key point being made, I find and have already argued in some detail the evidence for historicity sadly lacking. It has dominated a lot of the controversy since the book's publication. Since much of the fuss has been filled with unhappy distortions, it may be helpful to deal with the most salient one here. Contrary to what is said, it should be made quite clear that I am far from being alone among scholars who today view the so-called historical Jesus with total skepticism. True, most scholars of the California-based Jesus Seminar retain a very minimalist historical Jesus. But those familiar with their work know they have now peeled this particular onion down to such a fine core that it's barely discernible. There's no talk of any resurrection, for example. I recommend in this connection 2 books by Jesus Seminar Fellow, Dr. Robert M. Price, Deconstructing Jesus and the Incredible Shrinking Son of Man. Price is professor of biblical criticism at J. Coleman Theological Seminary, Carroll City, Florida. For a truly thoroughgoing and I believe wholly convincing examination of the problem, one could read the 7 books by Professor G.A. Wells, now retired from London University in the UK. Among the titles are The Jesus Myth and Did Jesus Exist? His most recent work, Can We Trust the New Testament?, is arguably the best survey of all the current scholarly research in this field. Wells quotes, for example, from the scholarly writing of the present Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, on the alleged sightings of the risen Christ in the 4 Gospels, a monumentally confused jumble of incomparable stories, the conflict among which has never been satisfactorily sorted out, and all of which bear the marks of extremely sophisticated literary editing. Williams calls the amazement of the disciples over the alleged resurrection a literary convention, and goes on to say that what the Easter texts present are imaginative approaches in the form of stories. The Archbishop notes that the only early testimony is Paul's list in 1 Corinthians 15, but adds reluctantly that it doesn't correlate with the gospel appearances and is a mere list with no indication whatever of the time, place, or circumstances. Thus, the vaunted evidence for a literal resurrection calls for a leap of blind faith. It falls apart on closer examination. The most serious difficulty to be faced on historicity is, as we have seen, the total absence of anything that can be called hard secular evidence for an historical Jesus coming out of the entire 1st century apart from Christian-sourced writings. In a day and age when there were secular pagan historians, satirists, and other observers in abundance, none saw fit to record any of the miracles or bizarre supernatural phenomena such as the eclipse of the sun during the crucifixion, or the earthquake, or the opening of the tombs, and appearances of the dead described in Matthew. The only reference to Jesus of Nazareth by Josephus is a clear forgery from the 4th century. The historical Jesus is vanishing. The spiritual Christ within awaits our discovery.
I didn't know there was anything in Josephus about Jesus. Is there something?
Yeah, there's something. I don't remember what it is. It's years since I've read much of Josephus.
I got this book of Josephus' writings, and it said large print. I thought, oh, good. The large print is about 0.9.
Yeah.
Come on, people.
Happy day.
Yeah.
So that was one I wanted to share with you.
Well,
And-
in the book of Corinthians, it said Jesus appeared to a group of 300 people. I was tracking how many mentions there were of Jesus appearing after the crucifixion, and there are a lot, but the one with 300 people in it is in Corinthians. I thought, okay.
Yeah.
So evidently Paul's letters didn't extrapolate to other surrounding cultures either.
He doesn't present Jesus as a living character. I mean, a real character.
No.
He
refers to the crucifixion, but that's about all.
Yep. And that he's heard about, read about, but never straight from the source.
Yeah, he was not there.
He was not there. And so he doesn't try to make something up about it.
Yeah.
But, anyway. This is the one I had to... When I said I'd copy this for you, I have the book that is Life After Death. I have the original. It was printed in 1991. And he said it was in chapter 12. So I got mine out, and it wasn't there. I'm sorry. I'm getting myself all confused. I thought I had it, and I didn't have the book. So I quickly ordered it with a rush order on the shipping so that I'd get it last week. And it came. And it was the new one that came out in 2021. So I went to the 12th chapter, and there was no 12th chapter.
How lovely.
Yeah.
So
Which book is that you're talking about?
This is what I got. There's Life After Death.
Oh, yeah, I looked at that last week.
And that didn't have it. So then, this past week, I ordered that one.
And did that one have the 12th chapter? Or you haven't looked yet?
Look at your page.
This one?
No.
That's page 9, this is 14.
There it is. What does that say? Chapter what?
Listen to chapter, that says 14.
Exactly.
Okay.
Tom said it was in the book, and it was in chapter 12. It's in chapter 14.
Okay, it's there.
It still wasn't in
Another book.
the other book. So anyway, and if it is in there, I just didn't know where it might be, and it would seem like a long haul to hunt for it. Now, this is what he was suggesting that we have an opportunity to see. He said, anyone who wishes can check this by looking up my 1991 book, Life After Death. Chapter 12 of the book is titled The Christ Myth as the Ultimate Myth of the Self. It drew sharp criticism from conservative-minded Christians at the time. I blame their accrued literalism for the way Christian thinking and teaching about an afterlife has become so distorted, irrelevant, and unreal. I wrote, a story and a whole range of symbols meant to relate us to our own inner selves have been taken as purely historical facts about a distant, inhuman person who was God in disguise. As Carl Jung argued, it makes Jesus Christ a monster figure to say that one can only become fully human in the presence of and through the death of one who is uniquely God-man. In that view, we can never be what he was. He was so far unlike us and removed from us as to be of little real help. Pretending to live a normal human life, he really always had 4 aces up his sleeve. This is why, incidentally, Jung was so critical of the imitation of Christ as a way of moral development. He argued that only a God within had the much-needed psychological power to transform human personality. So, anyway, this is that material. It begins with a Joseph Campbell quotation. Somebody want to read that?
The biography of a spiritual teacher is not an account of historical facts. It is a symbol of the spiritual biography of that man, and all the elements of the biography are symbolic. Just through reading them properly, you learn from the message.
Yeah. By now, one thing has become abundantly clear. I am convinced that the chief reason Christian teaching about life after death seems so remote and unreal to so many millions of people today is that the whole package designed by the word Christianity has been understood with a crude, mistaken literalism. A story and a whole range of symbols meant to relate us to our own inner selves have been taken purely as historical facts about a distant, inhuman person who was a god in disguise, who was a god in disguise. As Carl Jung argued, it makes Jesus Christ a monster figure to say that one can only become fully human in the presence and through the death of one who is uniquely God-man. In that view, we can never be what he was and is. He is so far unlike and removed from us as to be of little real help. Pretending to live a normal human life, he really always had 4 aces up his sleeve. In For Christ's Sake, that's another of his books, I argued that the underlying meaning of the Christ myth is one of the deepest, oldest, and most universal religious ideas known to humanity. Quote, that is the insight or belief that each one of us comes from God and lives, moves, and has his or her being in God. That each of us has a measure of his spirit, an inner divinity as an essential part of ourselves, and that we will one day be raised up beyond death to an eternal destiny with him. At the unconscious level where all the myths find their origin, the evangelists and early Christians saw in Jesus the prototype or pioneer of our common calling and eventual future. Our calling is to become what we are and to realize the divinity latent within us. God's gift of himself, herself, our true humanity, I wrote, lies paradoxically in our divinity. To regain the power and dynamic of the Christian gospel, the church today has to rediscover the truth that whatever else the Christian message is about, it is essentially a mythos or truth in story form of the self in everyone.
Now, how soon do you think the churches are going to convert to that?
Right.
Probably not.
Probably not.
And then he does these things, talking about myth and some Joseph Campbell and the virgin birth, baptism and temptation, and death and resurrection of Jesus, etc. And then he does a summary. The summary, I'll do that real quick. We can look at other pieces of this at another time. The church has for centuries insisted that Christ is every person and represents all of us. This, however, misses the profound truth of the myth that the reverse is also true. Everyone who comes to consciousness of their true nature as a physical, spiritual entity is Christ. It is not a matter of following or emulating some distant historical figure. It is seeing oneself as wholly identified with the same truths and principles that moved and energized him. In a real sense, as Jung insisted, the individual is naturally imbued with a latent divinity. Like Christ, the idea of two natures in one person describes each of us. It is a description of the direction of any human life, which is to say that psychic maturity resides in the discovery of one's native divinity. All of this, in my view, makes the truths of the story of Jesus as relevant and vital to our lives as our very next breath. Yeah, I like that. So I wanted you to have that. And as I said, we can look at more of that a little later. But I wanted to get us into this chapter 9. Was there a Jesus of history? The quotations are good. The first one is Earl Doherty from the Jesus Puzzle. Jesus of Nazareth in the Gospel story cannot be found in Christian writings earlier than the Gospels, the first of which, Mark, was composed only in the late 1st century. There's no non-Christian record of Jesus before the 2nd century. And the other one is from Alvin Boyd Kuhn, one of our favorites. When the conception of a purely spiritual Christ could no longer successfully be imported to the turbulent masses who clamored for a political savior, it was found necessary or expedient to substitute the idea of a personal Messiah. The swell of this tide carried the church fathers to the limit of recasting the entire 4 Gospels in terms of a human biography. During the opening sequence of the Woody Allen film Husbands and Wives, Woody and his wife, played by Mia Farrow, are making final preparations to welcome lifetime friends over for dinner. Woody is neurotically fussing about and mumbles Einstein's saying that God doesn't play dice with the universe. No. Woody then turns, he just plays hide and seek. There is a hide-and-seek quality to the profound question raised by all of our explorations thus far. In the light of everything we have examined, can we say with any authority that Jesus of Nazareth actually existed as a historical person? I have very grave doubts that we can. It is abundantly clear to me that while there are indeed certain historical elements in the gospel accounts, specific place names, actual persons such as Herod, Pilate, Caiaphas, and the high priest, and alleged dates, these alone don't constitute a genuine history or biography in any modern sense. When we review the exact parallels between early Savior stories and the sayings and actions of Jesus, it's more than obvious that what we're dealing with is another variant of the overarching archetypal theme of the same mythos religion. Only this time, would somebody take the next paragraph?
I hasten to assure the reader that I am fully aware, at first quite, perhaps many, to claim that a historical figure who has inspired so centuries is, in fact, a mythical copy of many preceding saviors is somewhat a shock. That I found easy to accept myself. But in matters of faith, as in all else, truth demands my allegiance over acted upon in love. The reality is that God calls us to use his divine gift of reason, and we ignore this not just at our peril, but to our ultimate loss. What we are considering now is the logical consequence of all we have been through so far. Be patient and hear the argument to its end. You will from the start that we are being called not to an impoverished vision, but to one that radiates with fresh understanding and hope. Way.
Relevant literature, I discovered that the myth of the historical interpretation repeatedly by such scholars as Dupuy, Drew, and a score of others. In spite of a massive scholarship on the topic, however, in spite of the evidence from the study of comparative religion in particular, the historical view of Jesus' life is still stubbornly maintained. Kuhn is correct when he says that all this scholarship, quote, points with steady directness, end quote, to the truth that the events of the gospel narratives are matched with amazing fidelity. Antecedent careers of such world saviors as Dionysus, Osiris, Horus, Tammuz, Adonis, Attis, Orpheus, Mithras, Krishna, Balarama, Vyasa, Buddha, Hercules, Sargon, Serapis, Marduk, Islubar, Witoba, Apollonius of Tyana, Yehoshua ben Pandera, and even Plato and Pythagoras. We have seen for ourselves the clear reality of this view in our earlier detailed comparison of the lives of Horus and Jesus. Somebody want to take the next one?
Matthew's technique of scouring the Old Testament for appropriate prophecies to act as a framework for his narrative gives the gospel a surface feeling of authentic Jewish history. But this whole edifice collapses when you realize that these so-called prophecies were all fulfilled in the Old Testament and can be wholly explained without any future reference at all. Often in the New Testament they have been taken out of context and twisted beyond recognition. Hebrew prophecy, it must be remembered, was not about foretelling, but about forthtelling. In other words, about speaking out on issues immediately at hand. Their total artificiality is fully revealed when one reveals how they are used to make Jesus do exactly what his predecessors in the sun god myths had already done centuries before. This is confirmed by the fact that the body of material regularly used in the ceremonial dramas of the widespread early mystery religion around 12,000 years BC makes up, in general, the series of events narrated in the New Testament as if they were Jesus' personal life story.
Yeah.
It's 1,200 years.
Yeah,
not
1,200.
12,000. Might as well be 12,000.
Yeah, it's,
Yeah.
and it continues. Massey, near the end of his most important work, Ancient Egypt, the Light of the World, offers detailed proof that the literalizers of the legend and the carnalizers, historicizers, that's a nice word, historicizers, of the Egyptian Gnostic Christ have but gathered up the empty husks of pagan tradition, minus the kernel of the gnosis, inner knowledge of the meaning of the higher spiritual truths. So when we have taken away from their collection all that pertains to Horus, there's nothing more than the accretion of blindly ignorant belief on which to base a Judean history. Then Massey concludes, of all the Gospels and collections of sayings derived from the ritual of the resurrection in the names of Matthew or Matthew, On or John, Thomas or Tammuz, or Tum, Hermes, Uemhotep.
Uemhotep, yeah.
Yep. Ausa or Jesus, those that were canonized at last as Christian are the most exoteric and therefore the farthest away from the underlying hidden and buried but imperishable truth. Yeah. Good old Massey. Someone want to tell us about Massey?
Massey testifies that either Philo, the brilliant Alexandrian Jew who labored so hard to effect a syncretism of Greek Platonism, Egyptian mysticism, and Mosaic Hebraism, and who was an exact contemporary of Jesus from 20 BC to 50 BC, not Irenaeus, 13 to 200 CE. The Bishop of Lyons and one of the earliest church fathers believed that the divine word, Logos, could ever become incarnate in one man. Kuhn says that Philo no more knew of a Christ that could be made flesh than he knew of Jesus in human form, and lived at the time of alleged historical Jesus. The same is true of Titian, the Christian apologist and Gnostic, 160 CE, who wrote the first ever attempted harmony of the four Gospels, the Diatessaron. He completely disclaimed the notion of the Christ having assumed an actual body, and did all the Gnostic Christians, as did all the Gnostic Christians. They declared it impossible that the divine Logos should suffer, since he was by nature both incomprehensible and invisible, a divine emanation of the one God.
Yeah, the stark truth is that apart from the four Gospels, and their full witness is really established only from about 140 to 170 CE, and the epistles, there is no hard historical evidence for Jesus' existence coming out of the first century at all. It must be remembered that no autograph, meaning original manuscript, of any one of the four Gospels has ever come to light. nor has any credible witness ever claimed to have seen such a manuscript. Origen says the four Gospels were chosen out of a very large number, we know of at least 20, and Irenaeus, somewhat oddly, says that the four were selected out of many because there were 4 winds and 4 quarters to the globe. Well,
Oh, well, yeah.
makes perfect
Corners,
sense.
yeah.
And Irenaeus, somewhat oddly, says that the 4 were selected out of many because there were 4 winds and 4 quarters to the globe. Kuhn quotes Mead, as did Jesus in Did Jesus Live? Okay. Kuhn quotes Mead in Did Jesus Live 100 BCE? When he writes, "It has always been an unfailing source of astonishment to the historical investigator of Christian beginnings that there is not one single word from the pen of any pagan writer of the first century of our era which can in any fashion be referred to the marvelous story recounted by the gospel writers. The very existence of Jesus seems unknown." I'll go on. What's even more curious is that the closer one gets to Jesus' alleged time, the greater, the more general is the denial or ignorance of his existence. But the further one draws away from it, the greater and more insistent are the proofs of it. This again entirely reverses the universal phenomenon of a historical recording. Most living characters are familiar entities during and immediately after their lives, and they wax romantic and are haloed only after centuries have elapsed. But Jesus was airy and ethereal in the first century and crystallized into quite a concrete personality only after several centuries. Something quite strange was going on. Somebody take the next part.
Very sadly, a work of Celsus, a 2nd century pagan philosopher, called the True Logos, which would have certainly thrown much light on all early Gnostic and esoteric interpretations of sacred writings of the time, was totally destroyed by literalist Christians. One intriguing fact, however, emerges from the mystery of the historicity
Yeah, that's a good word.
of Jesus. Of the church fathers, Irenaeus seems never to have subscribed to the story of Jesus' death on the cross, or his death at all in the early age of about 33. It is most curious, given the repeated claim by conservatives that Jesus' life was accepted as historical by the early church, that Irenaeus refers to a remarkable legend that flatly refuses the gospel history. The good bishop claims that Jesus was not crucified at the age of 33, but passed through every age and lived on to be an oldish man, a claim he says is testified to by church elders and was bequeathed to them directly from John. Papias, you remember, also said Jesus died in bed at an advanced age. Kuhn comments, "We are permitted to wonder how such a tradition attributed to so accredited a source as John could have lived on for so many years if the general field was occupied by the factual acceptance of the gospel narrative, or how it could have been purveyed by a bishop of such eminence in the church as Irenaeus,
Irenaeus.
or okay, whatever,
Irenaeus, yeah.
Yeah.
that dude."
The truth
That
is that both Massey and Kuhn have considered the question of the historicity of Jesus in the minutest detail, each spending hundreds of pages examining the evidence. What's more, they do not rest solely upon their own long years of labor in the field, drawing heavily on the work of scores of other eminent scholars in reaching their conclusion. In finally negating the historical Jesus, Kuhn cites not only such well-known philosophers as Kant, Hegel, but the leading Jewish and Christian biblical experts of his era. He quotes, for instance, Robert Keble, who in his book, The Great Galilean, says, "Nobody knows enough of the early life of Jesus to write a biography of him. For the matter, no one knows enough for the normal Times obituary notice of a great man. If regard were had to what we should call in correct speech definitely historical facts, scarcely 3 lines could be filled." In his challenging work, The Twilight of Christianity, the Bible scholar Harry Elmer Barnes reviews the meager number of non-gospel mentions of Jesus, a sum total of 24 lines from Pliny, Tacitus, Suetonius, and Josephus, and states that given that these passages are virtually all forgeries and interpolations, they constitute pure evidence of what...
Poor evidence.
Huh?
Poor evidence.
Yeah. They constitute poor evidence of what the Orthodox insist on calling one of the best attested events in history.
Yeah.
Barnes points out that even if this secular testimony was indisputably reliable and authentic, it would be faltering support for so great an edifice to rest upon. Add to all this the undeniable fact that there is in the extant Jewish literature of the first century not a single authentic reference to the founder of Christianity. For a detailed critical look at the specific references to the 4 non-Christian authors just cited, I recommend Doherty's discussion in his book, The Jesus Puzzle. Commenting in his 1999 book, The Fabrication of the Christ Myth, on the well-known gospel story of the Gadarene swine, which rushed down a steep cliff and were drowned in the Sea of Galilee, the Jewish scholar Joseph Leidner points out that because Gadara is actually several kilometers away from the sea, the whole incident is evidence of either ignorance or total lack of concern about veridical history. Citing other similar examples, he writes, "From the evidence, the blunt conclusion emerges that the gospel writers did not know the geography and customs of the Holy Land and did not know Judaism itself. They were working with source materials having nothing to do with historical data of any kind." Yeah.
My favorite one is when Jesus was in the synagogue teaching, reading from the script, the scrolls, and he said, "This has been fulfilled in your hearing." They decided it was blasphemy, and they dragged him out of the synagogue up a hill to pitch him over a cliff head first to kill him.
Mm-hmm.
The very next line says, "And he turned and went away among them." How the heck did he do that?
He became invisible.
He did. He changed his vibration to a higher rate, and their lower angry rate, they couldn't see him.
Mm-hmm.
And then the very next line after that, he shows up in Capernaum.
Mm-hmm.
Now, blasphemy is a death sentence. And so it's 33 miles from where he was to Capernaum. And if he walked that or even rode a donkey, someone surely would have caught up to him and killed him fulfilling the blasphemy edict.
I would
Yeah.
think.
But
Yeah.
so not only could he turn his vibration so they couldn't see him, he could bilocate. Whoa. And when you present this with somebody who's a literal Bible scholar, they say, well, a few things got left out of the translation. And I thought, no shit, Sherlock. A few things got left out, like the whole meaning of what's going on here.
Bilocation is one of the things that is considered when the church is going to possibly, what do I want to say, sanctify a saint.
Mm-hmm.
Padre Pio. Have you heard of Padre Pio?
Yes.
He was Italian. He had stigmata, the wounds of the penetration in the hands of the nails, supposedly, and as doing mass, he would have to have rags or some kind of fabric wrapped around his
So you wouldn't bleed all
hands.
over everything.
Yeah, and one of the things that they discovered and they seemed to find the truth of it, that he did bilocation, 2 places at once. There was a family, and I don't remember details of what was going on within the family, but the family was praying together, and after they prayed, the son said, "Mother, did you see that man over there? All the while we were praying." And she didn't know what he was talking about. So he described the man. It was the image of Padre Pio. Kid kind of identified him to the T. And they did enough research that they came to the conclusion amongst themselves that the church people at the Vatican, that it was indeed a bilocation. He was in Italy. They were in New York. And he showed up in their home. That's one of the things. So yeah, if he could do it,
We can do it.
yeah, you think Jesus could do it, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
It just takes a collapse of time.
mhm,
And time is a human creation.
mhm.
And when you can, in consciousness, collapse of time, you can be there.
Mhm.
And I was reading something about the collapse of time, and somebody was in Kansas City and they were going to St. Louis. That it took an instant for them to get to St. Louis, and how that happened. I'm reading this stuff on time, and it's mind-boggling. But time has a forward arrow that started with the Big Bang
Mhm.
and does not go backwards. However, with quantum physics, they're discovering that when you start looking at these invisible particulates, there is no time. There's no backward and forward. It's only when you back up and you look at the whole picture that time goes forward. And I was thinking about you saying, when you get the bigger picture, this other stuff shows up.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Never-
I've never done bilocation. I have become invisible.
Yeah, I have.
David Hansen.
Yeah,
Well, I used to carry him around. He didn't drive, and he'd come over to my college and say, "Can we go?" I'd take him someplace or whatever, and he wanted to go down into the city. So we did that, and so we were in a bar, and someone came in. I knew. It was the time when the ministers come, and this person was on my L&O, and I said to David, I said, "I've got to become invisible."
Yeah.
Because I didn't want him to see me. He came right up to where I was, stood there looking around, and didn't acknowledge me at all.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jesus.
I was in the airport in Los Angeles going to convention, and Vi Davis and a few others were coming to pick me up. And I was standing there by the luggage carousel, waiting for my suitcase to show up. And they swear they walked by that very place 3 times and didn't see me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you can do these things.
And we may not know we're doing that, because I had one person who swore up and down he met me in Texas, and I had never been to Texas at that time, but was absolutely sure. And so it could very well have been that I bilocated to somewhere in Texas, but I was not conscious of doing that. Like I was not conscious of being invisible at the airport.
No. Don't be going 2 places at once here. You're going to get me all confused. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to leave room for some of this stuff, because we're talking about stuff that's outside the boundaries of our experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I've heard of trans-teleportation, and I've thought, that would be cool, and I can see how that could happen.
Mm-hmm.
Save a lot of gasoline, wouldn't it?
Hey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The closer quantum physics gets to deeper and deeper and deeper, the more we can see how things happen that in human consciousness can't be aware of, but they exist. And it's been an adventure reading some of this. The book is called The Physics of God.
Uh-huh.
And it is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Need to remember that. Physics of God. I want to just finish this next paragraph. And that's the last one on page 163. Mm-hmm. We must remember that very few periods in the history of the ancient world were so well documented as the period when emperors Caesar Augustus and Tiberius reigned supreme. Yet one amazing fact must be faced. No contemporary non-Christian writer even knew of Jesus' existence. It's for this reason that Barnes was able to declare Jesus a mythical person, the product of the myth-making tendencies common to religious people of all ages, particularly the period of the early Roman Empire. He lists Bruno Bauer, Albert Kalthoff, Arthur Drews, J.C. Stendhal, Emil Felden, Jensen, Lublinsky, Bolland, Vanderberg, Charles Verolo, whatever.
Anyway, all these people.
Rainer Couchot, Gerald Massey, Emilio Bossi, George Brandes, John M. Robertson, well, I know him, G.R.S. Mead, Whitaker, Edward Carpenter, and W.B. Smith among the eminent scholars and critics who have contended that Jesus was not historical. That's a huge number of people from a very broad period of time.
Thank you.
But we get to go see Blavatsky too.
Which would mean that the disciples were all a myth. And yet at the Vatican, we've got St. Peter's Basilica.
And they've got plenty of bones.
Yeah, and Paul's cathedral as well is there.
But the bones and things are questionable.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like the original cross of the crucifixion.
Yeah,
A piece of the wood.
Yeah. And
they're all over the place.
I've heard the quotation where there's enough pieces of the wood of the true cross to make a forest.
A forest of error thought.
Yeah, yeah. And most of that, all the places that are now labeled as this was this and that was that, in the story of Jesus, they were products of Middle Ages,
Yeah.
and some of them were due to what's his name, the one who converted to Christianity.
Yeah.
Constantine. His mother
Yep.
found the true cross,
Yeah.
supposedly, and it'd be nice to have a piece of it. Jack, a piece of the true cross.
Well, and when they built the cathedral, in order to get the emperor's funding and so forth, they had to have a relic, a remnant. And then all of a sudden they were canonized as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if your cathedral didn't have a relic, then you were ignored. It was local, you were ignored.
Every Catholic altar has a relic.
Oh, really?
Yes. In the altar, there will be an altar stone. It will be an actual stone. It could be about the size of this book. And it's usually sunken down into the altar. So it's flush. And there is a place in that altar stone where a relic has been placed by a bishop and blessed, supposedly.
And how do they know that these relics are real?
Well,
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Because the bishop blessed it, that's how
I
they know
see.
it's real.
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
But in if it's somebody who's more contemporary and you know they died and there are things that could be saved and venerated. Been to Montreal?
Oh,
No.
sure.
No.
There's a what do you call it? There's a big place that's famous for healing, and it is a Catholic shrine. A priest started it a century ago or more, and seen the banks of candles in Catholic churches, you know. This has enough to probably melt steel. You walk into one of the rooms and there are steps going up with the candles all up, going up for a couple of layers. It's an incredible place, and it's packed with crutches and other things, some supposedly healings. But it's supposed to be a sacred shrine, and it's up on Montreal, Mount Royal is in that neighborhood. It was a interesting place. I toured it a few years ago, and they're happy to sell you some
Pieces of
holy oil
Oh, of course, yeah.
holy
and some
water.
blessed candles that you can take home and burn.
For a price.
There's
Yeah.
a cathedral at the very western tip of Spain, at the end of that long. Yeah, the words fail me too. Is that, but it's supposed to be all of the bones of James, brother of Jesus, and that somehow he sailed up the coast and shipwrecked on the shore there, and that's where they built this cathedral. It is ginormous, and if it hadn't been for one guard who was on the ball, I'd probably still be there. Because my brother and I walked way back into this and so forth, where all these rooms are in little chapels and stuff. And finally, this guard came running after us, and they said, the place is closed for an hour, and he had to get us out of there. I can't remember that trail goes from France all the way to that,
To Spain.
yeah, Spain, yeah.
To that huge cathedral in Spain
Yeah.
that has the biggest incenser in the world, I think.
Yeah, that one,
Yeah.
that one, yeah. Yeah, that incenser comes down
Oh,
about 40
God,
feet
yes.
from the ceiling, and they swing
Swing
it
it,
forever.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah,
Get hit with that thing and leave a scar.
yeah, that's in a movie that they made about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
I
have,
saw that movie with
yeah,
my daughter and her husband in
yeah,
Springfield.
and I have that movie. It got passed around to Unity Ministers.
Yeah, that's
But all the names fail me right now.
that's a major pilgrimage
Yes,
to that
yeah.
place.
And you walk it, or you can ride it on a bicycle.
Yeah.
But it takes a couple of months
Yeah.
to walk it, and there are places all along the trail where you can stop. There are hostels. There's so
Yeah.
forth,
Yeah.
and that's the locals, and that goes through Basque country in the north of Spain. Yeah,
It just piece of information if you ever have a healing need and you get desperate, in the china closet down towards the auditorium, on one of the lower shelves there's a little plastic container, not very high, that has dirt in it. There's a shrine that I was told I should go see, and I can't remember exactly now. You know, it's been so many places, and now I can't remember where it is. But you find this church.
It's in Texas, isn't it? I was there.
Yeah. Is it Texas? Is that where we were?
I think so.
Anyway, you go down this road that it's out in the country, and all of a sudden you see this church, and it's another place with all these crutches and things, and in a special room they have a place in the floor where people take some dirt, and supposedly the dirt will heal you. I guess you have to eat it or something, I don't know.
yeah.
the reality is they keep refilling it from down
I
in
was
the
going to
woods.
say that
Yeah, out in the
eventually
woods.
they'd have a cavern there that people would fall in.
But I bought a little container and then I went and I filled it up. I got the goods. So,
And I took some of yours after we got home.
did you eat any?
Huh?
Did you eat any?
The dirt?
Yeah. You take
To
medicine,
cure
don't you?
yourself.
It's how you cure yourself. Yeah. So we'll start on that page 164.